My name's Coral. It's lovely to have you here. Hopefully you've already, maybe know a bit about me already, but I am a learning technology consultant with 4th Street Digital, and I've got a special guest with me. Ellis is here as well.
Hello everyone. I'm Ellis, and I'm also a learning technology consultant, and I'm from P Consultancy.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ellis. So this session today is all about engaging students in online classrooms. We may get a few other people kind of coming in a bit late because we had quite a few signed up. But we'll just kick off and get started, so we don't take any more of your time up. Okay, so what we're going to be covering in the session today is we're going to be looking at some strategies for engagement. So just different things that you might want to think about of how you can engage students online. And then we'll be looking at the technologies to help support that. So we really want to look at both sides, the sort of pedagogy behind some of these strategies, as well as the technology. And then we're going to do a sort of brief section on using breakout rooms and effective engagement in breakout rooms, because breakout rooms seem to be something that we get a lot of feedback on, where people feel the engagement is lacking. So we wanted to touch on that as well, and hopefully have some time for some questions at the end. But there's a small group, so please feel free to ask questions at any point in the chat, or you can unmute yourself as well. What would be fantastic before we kind of launch in is if I can just ask you to pop into the chat your name and what your kind of job is, where you're coming from today. That would be fantastic, so we can get to know you a little bit better. If you could just pop that in the chat, that would be great. I think you all use the chat, so hopefully you know where it is. That's brilliant. If I could just also get you just to check that you're able to mute and unmute yourself. The mute button in Zoom is should be either at the top or the bottom, depending on your setup, depending on how you're logging into Zoom. But if I could just ask you to give yourself an unmute and just say a quick hello, and then mute yourself again, just so you can check that you've got that functionality and that's all working for you as well, that'd be great.
I'll be brave and go first. Hello.
Hi, brilliant. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, I'm Anne. Hello.
Hello, hi, Anne. Nice to see you. Perfect, thanks. Brilliant. Okay, great. So quite diverse there. That's great. It's got somebody from lead dental care professional tutor for NHS and University of Edinburgh learning technologist. So brilliant, lovely to have you both here. Okay, so let's first of all, I want to just start with a quick question, just to kind of get us thinking about engagement and students online. And I would just like to know a bit about your experience for what do you think are the sort of main challenges that students face with keeping engaged online and that we face with keeping them online. So just from your point of view, so whether I know obviously you're a learning technologist, when you're developing courses, when you're working with teachers, what do you see as the kind of main challenges that students face? You can just pop it in the chat. And what are the kind of things you've experienced yourself if you've been teaching students? What are the difficulties that you're really coming across for keeping students engaged online? That'd be great. Yeah, and that's a great point. So the kind of mix of delivery and engagement for different learning styles, I think that's really, really such a key point and really difficult in an online environment, because we don't often maybe know or realize people's different learning styles in the same ways we would face-to-face. Face-to-face, I think you can often see on people's faces that they're not quite understanding what you're talking about, and they're not quite engaged with what you're saying, and you can kind of get to know them a bit better, but that is much more difficult online. Yeah, and some of the platforms, yeah, and some of the technology that can be really, really difficult. And I think actually it's one thing that's a really, really great point, Naomi, that a lot of people assume that students, particularly if you have younger students, are really, really fantastic online and that they have great digital literacy, but actually that's not often the case. They might be really, really on it with social media and, you know, knowing what they're doing in terms of the social media apps they use. But a lot of people haven't learned online before or haven't used technology to learn online. And as we know, it's a very different framework, is a very different scope. And people can find it really difficult and actually don't have the sort of digital literacy skills. So yeah, that's a really good point. Terrible digital literacy. Yeah, it's amazing. You just assume people are going to be like on it because they know how to use social media and things, but actually, you know, it really doesn't happen like that. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you. That's really, really useful. And thanks for your feedback there to both of you. Okay, so to start the session, I'm just going to minimize the chat for myself. So I'll get Ellis just to keep an eye out in case any questions come on.
Yep.
So I think one of the key things, or the way that we wanted to frame the session today, was just to think about some of the adaptations that we need to make, because actually a lot of the things that we do face to face, we can just adapt into an online environment. But there are some things that are just very different, and we just have to try and get used to that new way of working. And it is really difficult, and it isn't always very comfortable for us. And when we're teaching or when we're, you know, developing things, we're designing things, the way of doing it naturally face to face doesn't always feel the same as online. But I think the key things that we've picked out are, one, we need to think about adapting to non-verbal communication. So, you know, I'm sure you've all often found that video can often be problematic if you're using something, depending on your platform, if you're using something like Teams, a lot of videos on the screen can kind of make things run slow and sluggish. Some people just aren't comfortable having their video on, and, you know, that's absolutely fine. We don't, you know, we never force anyone to have their video on. And probably most of you don't as well. But video can be problematic, and even sound, even getting people to speak can be really difficult. So I think we need to try to adapt to using type-based language. So like I'm asking you to use the chat, or I'm asking you to do other things like that. I think moving and adapting our styles to more type language is really, really important. Hi, Rosalind. Hello. We've just started, so don't worry, you haven't missed too much. The other thing to adapt to is thinking about multi-channel communication. So I think one of the things that comes across a lot is that people get really nervous and worried about interrupting and saying, I don't understand that, or they don't want to unmute themselves and say that they're confused, or they feel, you know, just nervous, like we all do. I mean, even before this, we were thinking, oh, like, you know, you feel a bit nervous because we're all in this new space, and it's very different from being able to engage people's expressions and how they're kind of coming across to you. So having multiple channels that people can interact with. So having that live chat function, having discussion forums, having, you know, even during your live lesson, having something like a shared collaborative document that people can just type questions into can be really, really useful, because particularly when you're dealing with international students, in a lot of cultures, and people come from different cultural backgrounds, sort of interrupting or questioning people isn't necessarily the norm, and that can be something that's really, really difficult to overcome in an online environment. So having those different channels and different ways of communicating can be really, really useful for that. And the last one is just thinking about having the anonymous versus non-anonymous communication. So having a balance of both. There's times, obviously, we need to know who's asking what. We need to know who our learners are so that we can engage and we can understand their progress and their understanding level. But actually having some form of anonymous communication is really, really powerful, and can be very much more inclusive. You can elicit a better response. So something as simple as an online poll, you know, so you can put an online poll on to gauge how people are understanding things, and it's anonymous. So students don't need to worry about being the only one that doesn't understand or the only one that's confused, because they've allowed some sort of anonymous feedback. And that also works with things like you can have discussion forums that you can set to anonymous depending on your VLE. You can have shared documents. You can have different areas where people can anonymously give feedback. And actually a really good way to do that is to use the private chat function. So I know that some people turn off private chat. So if you're using something like Zoom or some other live lesson software, you're able to use private chat with people in the meeting. So I can send like a private chat to any one of you currently in this meeting. You can send a private chat to me. And I've left that feature on, and that's because I think it's really important to allow people to ask you something anonymously, essentially. So anonymously from the rest of the class, not necessarily to you, but anonymously for the rest of the class. And I think that's really, really important. So I think that can be really, really useful for people. And you can do it in terms of saying, okay, everybody, now I want everyone to send me their response to this question, for example, and get everyone to do it at the same time. So you've got a window when people can use the private chat. So just thinking about those ways that you can build in that anonymous communication as well. So now what I want to do, now that we've sort of framed it a little bit, I want to talk through a few strategies or a few things to think about when we're talking about engagement. And these are more so thinking about the pedagogy and the kind of thinking behind it. And then we'll move on to the technologies that we can possibly use to support this as well. Okay, so starting off with communication. So there are a few sections to this. So communication is, as we know, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, when we're teaching online, because I don't know how you've all found it, and actually it'd be interesting to hear your answers to this if you want to type them into the chat. Do you find that you're having to communicate more? You're having to explain more. You're having to answer the same question more and more times online than you maybe would in a face-to-face environment? That would be interesting to find your answers on that if you want to pop them in the chat. How have you found communication in an online environment? Do you find that you're having to do a lot more? Because generally that's our experience when working with different clients, different teachers. We've really found that people are having to sort of over communicate what they are thinking and what explaining things, are having to over explain almost online. But I think, again, that's something that we just have to adapt to. Yeah, and so you said some students are adapting quickly, however, others you're having to translate. Yep, exactly. Conducted sessions, it's difficult to gauge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it can be really, really difficult, and it's not even so much just your live sessions, because almost in your live sessions it's slightly easier, but it's hard to even gauge the understanding of asynchronous tasks and activities. So I think this is one of the absolute key areas, and we've just pulled 3 things. Obviously this is, it's a relatively short session, so we can't get through everything, but these are 3 areas that we thought were quite important. So one was thinking about setting expectations, and setting expectations about how people should engage, where they should engage, and what your expectations are as a teacher is so important up front. The one thing that we've found really, really powerful is to ask your class to set those expectations with you. So work with the class in the first few weeks to say, okay, these are my expectations, or this is what I would like in terms of engagement. What would you like as a class? How would you expect each other to engage? What would make your learning experience better? And actually sitting down and agreeing like a sort of checklist of these are the things that we would expect as a class in terms of engagement between us. So it could be things like, could be having your video on, it may not be having your video on, it could be answering questions, it could be participating in breakout rooms, whatever those things are. But we've found that when we actually include the learners in setting those expectations, they're much, much more likely to then engage with them and to stick to them as well. So that can be a really, really good tool. And it can also bring out some things that you may not have thought about before, where learners are a little worried about maybe saying something wrong, or they have something going on at home that you're not quite sure about. So I think building that in where you can ask the learners to engage in setting expectations works really, really well. Obviously, having really clear instructions is, as we know, always important, but particularly online. As I said, we often find that having something like a bullet pointed list of this is what I expect you to do, this is where you need to do it, this is how you need to do it. Sometimes you have to be give a more parameters online than you might face to face. And again, it might not be how we're used to teaching, or it might not feel that they've got as much freedom, but actually it works really, really well for making sure students have an understanding of what they're supposed to be doing. And that's so important for engagement, because for a lot of students, as soon as they don't understand something, they just won't engage with it, because they'll not want to, they'll not know what they're supposed to do, and they don't want to say that they don't know what they're supposed to do. And the last part is providing multiple formats. So again, this is just about, and actually I think it alludes to the point that you made, Anne, I think about different learners and different learner types. I think that's so important and so key, and everyone learns very differently. And I think we need to remember that online, and being able to provide the same information, but in different formats, can be really, really helpful. Now I know that we are all always pressed for time and it's not as easy just to create video and audio and all this kind of stuff. So even having the same thing as an announcement, as a discussion forum post, as an email to students, even just those three, really, really helpful for people, because how they learn and the places they go to for specific information will be different depending on the student. But anything you can do to help in terms of explanation, as we know, hearing your voice and getting you to explain it over audio can sometimes be much, much better for a learner. So even think about just recording a short audio to explain a task can be really, really useful, and can again up that engagement level. So I've got a couple of icebreaker examples that I wanted to share with you that I'm not going to go into too much detail on, but I just wanted to show you in terms of when we're talking about that really clear explanation. And icebreakers obviously are a really fantastic way to get students to engage very early on. Are you able to see the icebreakers that are on the screen at the moment?
They've come through for me.
Perfect. Yeah. Great. Okay. Right. I'm just going to increase the size of the screen because it's probably not very big on your screen. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to go through one of these just to sort of talk through the different elements. So the first part, as you can see, just tell everyone your story. It's a simple introduce yourself to your classmates. We've all done similar things before. Provide a brief introduction, but then I think what the key thing here is it says if you don't know what to include, here are some suggested topics. And there's actually some bullet points of, you would have course specific questions, things that are specific to your course, but then also some questions like, where are you from? Why did you expect to take this course? Tell us someone you would like to meet, or your favorite movie, book, TV. And I know that we want to give students as much freedom as possible, but I think building in this level of detail at the beginning of the course, then we can gradually remove it and gradually reduce it as we go through. But building in this level of detail at the beginning helps students to engage, because they really understand what they're supposed to be doing. And then in the submission directions, you can see it says post your introduction, and obviously this would be specific to your own VLE. But the key thing is pick at least 2 posts of your classmates that are interesting to you and add your comments. So again, it's giving them really clear instructions of how we expect them to engage. So it's not just about posting it there, but it's also about responding to at least 2 people and posting your comments. Now, as we know, sometimes you just get a comment that says like, this is great. It's not necessarily an insightful comment, but especially in the beginning, just encouraging that engagement and interaction works really, really well. And then hopefully as they build through the course, then those comments start to get a bit more engaging. You could even be more specific about the types of things people might respond with. And one thing that's fantastic for this is also to do one yourself. So to post your response to this activity, so they've got a really clear example of the type of thing that they might want to do. So I'll send this afterwards over email along with the slides and the recording, so you can have a look at the other icebreakers there. But I just wanted to give you a little example of what I was meaning when I'm talking about a sort of level of clear expectations. Okay, so moving on to the next section, and this is all about essentially just keeping things, you know, person-centered, about the student, about you as a person, human-centered, because I think that's one thing, you know, a few of you mentioned earlier that not seeing faces and not seeing people, it can be much harder to feel connected to people and feel connected to your students and feel connected to, and for your students to feel connected to you and to their wider class. So this is another key thing for engagement, is that it feels like people are, they're just talking to someone that's human, that they feel comfortable in their online classes, that they don't feel nervous to communicate and to ask questions. And again, there's a few ways we can do that. And you've got to remember that all of this is sort of, there's increased cognitive presence for these students, just as there is for us. So while we're learning all of this new technology and how to get, you know, how to put everything together, and all of the teachers are learning that, students also have that same increased cognitive presence. And as I think it was Naomi said earlier, you know, a lot of students don't have that digital literacy skills. So we need to try to put ourselves in their shoes and keep things simple and clear. So I think it's, again, keeping it really simple, clear instructions, being authentic. You know, don't be afraid to let your personality out. And this really helps with building a community and building a sense of personal relationship that happens really naturally in your own classrooms. Because when you're delivering content face to face, you are very much, your personalities will ooze out. They just will. Like you all have those fantastic personalities that people get to know, but it's much harder online, especially if we don't feel comfortable. So I think making sure that we are allowing our personalities to come across. And if you're someone who designs learning, so if you're a learning technologist, working with your teachers and working with the subject matter experts to bring out their personality within the course materials and in the way that they make announcements and the communication that they put out in the videos that they put across. And that can be actually much more difficult online. Sometimes I watch back videos that I've made where I'm explaining something and I'm like, God, I sound like a robot or something, because I'm so like, you know, you're staring at the screen, you're trying to get it right. So we often find that just being really authentic and real and not worrying too much about the technical aspects, again, can just really help to keep that engagement. And the last one is presence. So I know that you all are extremely busy. You only have a certain amount of hours in the week, but being present in places like the forums, discussion spaces, in that live chat, as well as in your live synchronous sessions, is really important for keeping students engaged and keeping them going on the course. So having that presence is really good. And it may be that you just you schedule things to go out. You can schedule announcements, for example, in your virtual learning environment, just an announcement to say, welcome to week 2. Here's what we're going to be doing this week, maybe even with a little video attached or a piece of audio. And those things can be made in advance and then scheduled to go out. It doesn't need to be something that you're going in and spending hours and hours doing every week. But just again, having those little touch points throughout your course, or adding in that content throughout your course and building it in, is so key to making students feel like you're present and you're there for them. And then the last section to talk about before we move on to the technologies is interactions. And obviously, as we know, the more, particularly online, the more interactions we have, the higher level of engagement we have. And it's just as simple as that. There'll be students who you struggle to get them to interact. You ask people, we've all been faced with that situation where we've asked people to say something or we've asked for an answer and no one responds. But that's why all those things we've talked about already, like having multiple ways to responding in the chat, using polls, using lots of different formats, not just asking people to respond verbally, is so important, because actually just seeing someone's face doesn't necessarily mean they're engaged. So building in those specific interactions really helps with, one, community building. So building in that collaboration and that working together from the beginning, getting people to know each other from the beginning. So things like those icebreakers examples that we just showed, a fantastic way to get people thinking and working together and getting to know each other. but don't be afraid to build collaboration in, get people to work in the forums, get people to work on a task together, you know, from the beginning, and really helps build up that community. And another thing I think that's really important is providing a safe social space for students to interact. So whether that be a discussion forum that's maybe like the cafe board, or the, you could just call it the social board, and it's just a place where students can have free reign and they can talk and they can socialise in there, but it's not about class necessarily. Another good tip that we've seen recently is some teachers, and it depends on the software you're using, but if you're using an online platform, allowing students to stay in your live lesson after it's finished. So if you're able to, and some live software doesn't allow you to do this as the host, if you're able to give hosting abilities to someone else, and then at the end of the lesson you can leave, and the students can stay if they want to, and they can talk and they can share and they can use that as a social space. Because I think it's so common that we don't actually socialize as much online. In a way, we don't set up meetings just to have a chat normally. So your students may feel the same. They may feel like they don't really get much time to chat outside of those synchronous sessions. So allowing students to stay after and you leave is a great way to sort of encourage that socialization. And the more social and the more part of the community they feel, the more engaged they'll be with the content as well. And then the final point is to really make sure that our learning is active, that we're building in active learning. And there's a great quote here, the mind is not a vessel that needs filling up, but wood that needs igniting. And it's just something that we came across the other day, and I just think it's such a nice way to describe learning and how we learn, that it's not just about giving the students the information, but we want them to interact with it and to do things with it. And there's lots of great ways we can do that using technology, but also using all of these things that we've just talked about as well. Those are ways we can build an interaction throughout our materials. But having that real active learning focus is really, really key to keeping people engaged. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just give you very quickly an example of some things to do before you start your online class. And this sort of encompasses everything that we just talked about, the different examples. But I think these can be really, really useful. So these are, and what I mean by before you start your online class is just at the very beginning of your class, before you launch into the subject matter and what you're going to be talking about. Think about things like sending a pre-message or an announcement to students, you know, building up the class, look forward to seeing you. This is what we're going to be covering. You know, look forward to seeing you there. And also think about considering the atmosphere when students enter the room. So if you were here at the beginning, you've noticed that I had some music playing. You know, it's a very small thing, but it means that you're not just coming into like a quiet, dead space. And often, you know, something like that, or having an interesting image on your screen, or, you know, a funny GIF or a funny meme or something like that can actually be really, really great for students to just feel more engaged in the class because there's something interesting going on, and rather than just coming into like a quiet space. So just think about that as you're starting your class. How can you start it with something that's going to be interesting for students? And obviously you do, I'm sure you do this every class anyway, but you know, saying hello, using people's names, getting people to introduce each other, etc. The second thing, before you go into your subject, talking about what you're going to focus on that day. What are the goals? What are the objectives? And this comes back to that setting expectations and setting clear communication. And again, it may be that you get the whole class to talk about what are the goals for today? What are we going to focus on for today? You'll have a set curriculum, but what are the key things that maybe students want to take away from that particular lesson? And then the last task is to start with something interactive. So whether it's as simple as I asked you at the beginning to just type into the chat your name and where you're from, but then I also asked you to type in your experiences of keeping students engaged so far. Now that was a really, really simple basic task, but actually getting people to interact from that very beginning before you start talking at people can be really useful. So using a poll, using the reactions. So like, for example, if you go into your chat, you maybe can, I think you should be able to leave a reaction of some kind or a hands up. You can leave a little reaction. Yeah, so I can see, yeah, Naomi's got a heart, Anne's got a little celebratory thing. Elsa's got clap hands. Yeah, Rosalind, thumbs up. Yeah, so something as simple as that. Maybe you could say, you know, can everyone leave a little emoji for how you're feeling today, for example, or how your morning's been, or how your evening was last night. Just something super, super simple. But starting with that interaction straight away means that students aren't just sort of coming in and then switching off immediately. They're getting into that class. Perfect. Okay. So before we move on to the technologies that can support this, does anyone have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? Feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you want to unmute, if you want to be brave, then you can. If we're all okay, we'll just move on to the next section. Anything coming through in the chat there, Ellis?
We've just had Anne let us know that she's all right.
Good, perfect. Thanks, Anne. Okay, great, perfect. So we will move on now to talk about some of the technologies that can support this interaction. I'm going to pass over to Ellis for this part.
Yes, so as Coral's kind of gone over a lot of different things and sort of already touched on some of the aspects we're going to go over in a moment, but we've thought about the pedagogical side, but what technology can we use to implement that, and how can we ensure that we're using it in the correct way and matching it to the correct technologies? So we've created a table, which hopefully you'll find useful. And as Coral's already mentioned, you'll get a copy of these slides afterwards, as well as the recording. But what we've tried to do for you is provide some clarity on some of the non-digital means by which you might have been interacting with your students, and some alternatives, some technological alternatives that you can use if you're not already doing so in your teaching and your online teaching going forward. So hopefully, as you can see, we've got sort of literally a side-by-side representation for you. So we've got things like names on pieces of paper. You might have done this in your lessons before, where you will pull someone out of a hat and literally kind of go around the room and for want of a better phrase, pick on a student for them to answer a question. We've got things like voting cards and mini whiteboards. We've got writing tasks, and as you can see, we've put some alternatives on the right-hand side. And what I'd like to do for you now is actually go through these in this wheel of names that we've got at the top, and while we've suggested using the wheel of names as a name picker, you can put ultimately anything you want into the wheel of names. And we're actually going to showcase this live and ultimately pick the topics or pick the technologies. And then I'm going to give you a bit more of an idea as to how you can go about utilizing that in your teaching going forward. So if you just bear with me a moment, I will get the relevant screens open. Just 1 second. Computer's on a bit of a go slow. I might need your help, Coral. I might need you to share the screen for me, I'm afraid. Sorry.
That's all right.
Brilliant.
Does that come up?
There we go. Yeah, that's come through. So this is a wheel of names, and this is something that you can put together, and we'll show you how to do so in a moment, but it's a very quick tool that you can access on Google. Literally just Google wheel of names, and you can then input the colors and the things on the items so that you can literally spin the wheel and go for it. So I'm going to click to spin this, and it's going to pick something for us. So one one of the things we'll discuss is obviously quizzes and surveys, but I just want to draw your attention to this box here that is quite handy, and I will showcase how to set up the tool in a moment, but while we're actually utilising it, I want to just make you aware, for anyone who hasn't used this, a really great function about this is the ability to remove an option once you've had it selected. So in the instance of using it to pick students' names, as opposed to like pulling their names out of a hat, you can then remove their names so that they don't keep getting selected. Ultimately, it should be random, but as we all know, you can throw the dice and it'll land on 3 however many times. So it just kind of eradicates that for you. So you can remove the option. Now, as we've landed on quizzes and surveys, makes sense to discuss those. So you might have already used those in your online teaching or as part of your online teaching. But for anybody who hasn't, or to ensure that you're getting the best out of it, obviously we want to ensure that we are matching those tools with the best or correct pedagogy. So ideally, with your quizzes and surveys, we're looking at, in the instance of surveys, getting feedback on a topic. So you might wish to utilize a survey to ask students how they found a topic or how they found the delivery of a topic in regards to the technology that was used. It might be that some students really enjoy, for example, using their video and communicating with the other students, but some students might prefer a collaborative document and the sort of, I don't want to say anonymity, but not having to kind of show their personal life that's behind them. So the surveys provide you an opportunity to capture some of that information. And much like quizzes, you can kind of ask whatever you want and then gather that information together. With the quizzes, the difference being that you can sort of provide a mark or provide an allocation of points or whatever you deem necessary for any questions that you're picking out. So I think we're probably all very familiar with the idea of quizzes used for kind of mock testing and multiple choice and getting students to go through the subject matter. But I think another thing to bear in mind with things like your quizzes and surveys is that it doesn't just have to be words. You can add multimedia into those things as well. So you might go to your VLE specific quiz tool and traditionally pop in a multiple choice question, but you could consider flipping that on its head and perhaps asking students, instead of selecting, A, B, C, or D, providing images in the question and then annotating those images and getting them to have a bit more interactivity in that regard. So there's lots of different ways you can utilize those, but I feel we're probably quite comfortable with those. I think they've been around a little while. So if everyone's happy, I'll pick another tool. We'll spin the wheel again and go again. I'll just give everybody a chance to make sure they're happy. If you could just confirm in the chat for me, that would be great. Brilliant. I love that. Thumbs up, Naomi. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. There we go. There's another one. Thank you, Rosalind. And I can see Anne's responded in the chat as well. So that's great. So I will now remove quizzes and surveys so you can get an overview of that in real time, as it were. So you can see that is no longer on our wheel. And I should be able to spin this again. And let's see what we land on this time. Oh, that's close. So collaborative documents. This is something that Coral actually touched on earlier. And again, might be something that you guys have utilized within your teaching or have assisted with, or even just considered using. So there's lots of different ways you can go about setting up a collaborative document. And there's lots of different options in terms of what you want to utilize. So I think very traditionally, people hear collaborative documents and think of things like a Word document or a Google Docs that you can all kind of work on together in real time. And that's great. And it is really useful for students to work on a document together. And it's almost sort of the technology version of like your flip chart paper in a group, isn't it? But I think it's also worth bearing in mind that there's considerations such as whiteboards. You've got other things as well within your document suite. So you have, all right, you've got your Word docs, but what about a OneNote or an Excel document? If you're a science teacher or a maths teacher, you might want to work on some other style of document collaboratively. And so long as you've got the appropriate software, that's more than possible. And when I say the appropriate software, Google or Microsoft or whatever your tool of choice is, but there are plenty of things online as well. And one of the things we will showcase in a moment, actually, we've got an activity for you to carry carry out, ease on some of these interactive whiteboards. And I think the most important thing to remember with these collaborative documents is, as I say, that you can go about things in real time, but they provide an alternative for students who maybe don't have access to a microphone or maybe don't have access to a video. So you remove that technological disadvantage by providing them a system by which they can still communicate with students in real time, but they don't have to necessarily be seeing each other or hampered because they can't be seeing each other. I think another really important thing to consider with the collaborative document side of things is also the fact that more often than not, you receive a persistent document. So you can come back to this, you can ask students to add to it for asynchronous activities, homework, you can ask them to bring it to their next session. You can keep a record of everything that's going on without students having to kind of remember lots of different links. It's just one document that they can go and access. In the instance of whiteboards, you as a staff member can very often, or I say as a staff member, as the person who sets up the whiteboard, can very often save the record afterwards. So you can save a PDF, or you can save a set image of a whiteboard, or you can, in certain circumstances, keep a record of that online, depending on the software that you're using. So I think it's also worth that consideration that you've got that persistent record as well, which I think is very important and quite useful for students to be able to reflect back on, much as they would in a face-to-face setting with their exercise books and their textbooks. It just provides a different setting for that. So I think if we do one more and then we'll move on to the whiteboard activity. So I'll remove this one. And as I said a moment ago, we've got the table there for you with some suggestions on the different tools that you can use for different options. But if anybody's got any questions, then I'm sure, pop them in the chat and we can give you a bit more information, or you can contact either of us after the session and we can provide a bit more for you. So don't worry about the fact that we're not necessarily going to get round to all of them today. Brilliant. So it looks like we've got gamification. So this is one that sometimes people kind of get a bit panicked about. Gamification, that sounds a bit complicated. And actually, I think it's something that really excites students. I think a lot has to be said for learning being fun, or rather, how much we can learn when we're having fun, and that learning and teaching doesn't necessarily have to feel like learning and teaching. So gamification provides a whole new world to education. There's a couple of different tools we sort of think about initially. So we've got recommendations for things like Class Dojo, which allows you can access that through Google. It allows you to put students into teams, and they can select avatars and they can work together, or singularly. They can choose names for themselves rather than their personal names if they wish to, for the anonymity side of things. And you as a staff member can kind of see, and you could have it so that, right, I could have Coral as my student, and she might tell me I'm going to be in the session as Joe Blogs. So I know who she is, but the other students don't know who she is. So there's that reduction of sort of fear of rejection from your peers or saying the wrong thing. But then when you have students in the site, you can work together, like I say, or singularly, and you can get them to carry out tasks. And then once they've carried out those tasks, you can award them points. And it's sort of a digital version of like a star wall chart, if you will. But you can set mini competitions, as part of your class management, and encourage students to work together or work against each other, and sort of add that competition in, which for some students might not be the answer. So obviously use this with students that it's appropriate to use it with. But for a lot of students, provides a bit of incentive to kind of work in a different way. I think we can all sort of identify in ourselves those competitive natures can come out, and it can just put a different slant on your learning. So it's really interesting to consider. I can see that Coral's popped the link for that one into the chat, and I can see she's also popped in Kahoot. And some of you may or may not have used Kahoot already. I think it's fair to say that some of us have definitely experienced sort of death by quiz and PowerPoint and interactive Zoom calls and whatnot with our family during this time. And some of these have been used by individuals through Kahoot. And it's a really great little tool. It allows you to set up sort of quizzes that do sort of multiple choice. You can add multimedia in, but it also provides, if you ask it to do so, provides a bit of a countdown. So you can really do it like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire fastest finger first, and you can make it as entertaining and as competitive as you like, or you can do it a bit more pub style quiz and have students working together. You can share screens so that you have the whole class working together and no timers, so that they can all work collectively and try and discuss and engage with the matter in front of them and work out the best way forward. So there's lots of different options with Kahoot, and it just, again, it provides a different setting. I think we can all fall foul of kind of becoming a bit immersed in, right, here's a quiz tool, off you go, and that can become a little bit samey for your students. So just considering different tools, even if it is broadly the same activity that you're asking them to carry out, can kind of shake it up enough that it provides, like I say, a different stimulation for them. And so something to bear in mind. I don't think we've got time to go through all the others, because I want to give you enough time to work on your whiteboard activity in a moment. But as I said, we've got some others. We can provide some more information for you. So if you've got any questions on any of these, then we'll give you that information. But I think now we would like to move on to a slightly more interactive part for you guys. So putting you all on the spot a little bit, I know, but we want to get you using some of these tools so that you can see the advantages of them. If you wouldn't mind, Coral, could you bring the slides back up for us?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Right, so here's our activity on the whiteboard. As you can see, we've popped some instructions for you, and ultimately it's not going to be too onerous on you, I promise, but we would like you to take part if you're comfortable to do so. We would like you to have a little think about some of the technologies and techniques that we've discussed so far, and how you might use them in your own teaching or course design going forward, or how you might have used them already. That's fine as well. And what we've done is create a whiteboard space for us all. We've popped some post-it notes in there. So we'd just like you to go into the whiteboard, grab yourself a post-it note, just start typing in any one of them. We'd like you to pop your name into the post-it note somewhere, just so that someone knows that that one's being utilised. And pop any ideas that you have into that. Or if you'd like to do so, as you can see, we've got this little bar down the side showing you how to add a new post-it note. It's just this icon that's circled second from the bottom. And you'll be able to add a post-it note, but there are a good number in there, so hopefully you'll find one that you like. And if you can make a start on that, I'm just grabbing the link for you now, so bear with me a moment. Gives you a bit of time to have a think about what you might like to add to your post-it note. And do feel free, if you want to have a bit of a play around with some of the other whiteboard functionalities, then you're more than welcome to do so. Sorry, this computer is on an absolute go slow, so just bear with me one more moment. Okay, so I've just popped this in the chat for you. It should be coming through now. And what you'll be asked, if you click on that link, you'll be asked to just pop a name in when you get to the whiteboard. You could pop in any name if you'd like to. If you'd like to keep your anonymity, that's fine. But if you have a go at that one and see what happens, that would be really useful, and we can make a start on collating those ideas together. And if anybody's got any trouble accessing that, do let us know. You can pop in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. If you don't like the post-it notes, I'm more than happy for you to grab your own little space in the whiteboard and free draw if that's better for you. Oh, I can see your message there, Anne. It doesn't give you an option to pop your name in. Let's just double check that link because it's up on my screen for me at the moment.
It's coming up as if I can enter my name, but the minute I go to enter it, it clears and just goes to start drawing, so I can't see anything else.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
I've tried to switch off to make sure my pop-ups hadn't out.
It shouldn't, yeah, your pop-up shouldn't be causing you any trouble. Let's have a look. So it's definitely that link. Just bear with me a moment. I'll try a couple of things on my screen and see if I can get it to work. Oh, everyone's having the same problem. That's a somewhat.
I'll just stick a new link in and see if that.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe.
So I've just popped a new link in the chat there. Yep, okay, I can see Anne. Hi, Anne. Can see you in there. And Naomi, yep, I can see you there as well.
Looks like everyone's in now. Thank you, Coral.
No problem. Yeah, so as you can see, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring the whiteboard across quickly just to show you all. Yeah, it's in a new one. I just created a new one quickly so that we could get on with the task. I didn't want to spend too long. So you should be able to just click into the post-it like that and start typing. You can use this button down here, post-it, to create a new post-it for yourself. Or you can just draw if you want to draw. If the screen, if you're not seeing what I'm seeing, or if it's too close or too far away, you can scroll in and out yourself, or if you just if you just scroll, you should be able to move around on the screen. And the button on the right hand side here, pan, allows you to move like that over the screen. Perfect. So yep, I can see Anne's in there. You can see Naomi's moving around the screen. And this is a really fantastic tool because one, it allows you to see what everyone's doing in the class. Everyone can work on it together. But you could also allocate people their own particular space in here with which they could work on themselves. You can add images into here. There's a few different things you can do, and this is actually free to sign up to. So this board that we've created now is absolutely free to sign up, and you can just then invite people. So you would just create your board, you would go to invite, and then you get this code, and you would just copy the code and you would give it to your students, and they could come in here and use the whiteboard. And yeah, that's a fantastic idea to use it for brainstorming. So any ideas, you could use it as a team as well. So not just with your students, but with your actual team, I think would be really useful. Yeah, no problem. I think it's difficult when you're using one particular thing like Teams, and Teams and Zoom actually both have whiteboards built in, but the functionality is quite limited. We often find in some of those places, Teams, even Zoom, the functionality of the whiteboard is quite limiting, whereas something like this is really fantastic for keeping everything together. You can also export the board and you can save it. So it means that you can save what's been done, and we'll do that at the end of this. We'll just save this and we'll send it to you all as well. But you can sort of come in and do different bits. You can change colors if you want to be a little bit different. Feel free.
And the students can export the board as well, so that they, if they find something particularly useful, or that say they've created notes that they want to then reflect on later, they've got that ability to keep that board as well as a staff member who set it up.
Yeah, Naomi, that's a really good point. Naomi's just popped in the chat that if you use the Teams web browser with the desktop app, the whiteboard, it depends what you're using, whether you have the app or the web browser or the different ones of Teams. The whiteboard app has different functionality. So yeah, it's kind of an issue with Teams sometimes, but because not everyone has the same thing downloaded.
And also, if students are accessing Teams through their phones, one of the things on the wheel of names that we didn't actually get to was the smartphones. And I think it's fair to say that some students don't have access to a computer, so they are often joining these things on their phones. One of the great things about this whiteboard is that they can do that through their phone, but you can also still upload, as Coral says, images, so that they can pop things in there in real time, and type and draw with their finger, which I personally find a bit easier than with the mouse. I don't know about anybody else, but it provides an extra level of versatility as well for students to be able to access this on their mobiles or a tablet device as well as a laptop.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just going to pop in the chat quickly. You don't have to access this other one, but another whiteboard app that we find really, really useful is called whiteboard.fi. This is slightly different, but whiteboard.fi allows you to give everybody in your class an individual whiteboard. So when you log on to the class, you would see all of the students' whiteboards, but the students, when they log on, would only see their own. So that's quite good, a very different way of using whiteboards, but it's quite good for that sort of thing we were talking about, where maybe it's something you want students to work on individually, but during a live lesson. And again, you can see the actual engagement. So you're not asking them to write it down. You're not asking them to go away and complete it separately. You're asking them to do it on something that you can actually access and see, and you make sure everyone's sort of completing the task. And students also know that you can see it. So I think that sometimes helps a little bit with engagement when they know that you can see what they're doing, and we can see your name, so we know if you're here or not as well. So that can be really, really useful.
And that one's a little bit different in so much as the students typically can't see each other's whiteboards. So there's that anonymity sort of fear of rejection issue removed, because they're just working on their own. But you as a staff member, if you wanted to demonstrate something that a student had done and wanted to share that with the rest of the class, could share it via a screen share quite easily. So you've got that flexibility, whereas obviously on this whiteboard, unless someone sort of really pans out and uses a space out of the way, all of the students are accessing all of their peers' work as well. So it can be useful maybe in those earlier settings where students aren't as familiar with each other, if appropriate.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm just going to go back to the slides, Ellis. Thanks so much. And thank you everybody so much for your participation as well. We will send that whiteboard, we'll download it and send it to you afterwards as well. And one thing to be aware of with most of the whiteboard apps is that there's a shelf life for that whiteboard. So it's not something that you could probably work with and then work with the next game week and the next game week and the next game week. You'd have to set up a new one each time you wanted to use it, but you can download the contents from it. So you could download the content, you could review it in a class, and then you could use it for the next class. So I know we're just coming to the end of the time, and I don't want to keep you any later, seeing as it's 8 o'clock on a weeknight, and I'm sure you've all got other things to do. So we're just going to finish up very quickly by talking a little bit about group work. We'll only be 5 minutes more and then we'll finish up. But just we know that group work can be difficult to get people to engage. And just one thing that we wanted to share was this sort of checklist for group work activities. And again, it all comes back to that having that clear communication and expectations. And this can just be a really useful checklist to have for you as a teacher, but also, if you're designing learning, if you're working with teachers, to make sure that students have all of these things, if they know all of these things and all of these things are clear before they go off and engage in group work, whether it's in a breakout room or like an activity like we just did. So they want to know how we'd expect them to collaborate, what tool they're going to use, and we've suggested some tools there. What output do you expect to see at the end? How will they report back if there's a reporting back element, and how would they decide who is going to report back? If it's a group, small groups, for example, you know, what are ways that they might decide who's going to report back? Because again, I'm sure we've all had that that happen where students go off into a breakout room, they do a piece of work, they come back, and then you ask someone to explain what they did, and it's silence because nobody wants to, no one from the group wants to report back. So making sure that they know before they go to breakout rooms, someone has to report back, and these are some of the ways you might want to facilitate that. And one way that we can facilitate that is by assigning roles in group work. Assigning roles can really help to mitigate problems. It can help to bring out some of those shyer students and the students who maybe don't feel as brave and don't feel that they can really, you know, say things. It really helps with all of these things. And we've just suggested 3 roles here, but there are so many different roles that you could use. But again, building this into your activities and building it into your learning. So saying to students, you know, as part of the task, we want you to assign roles to everyone in the group. So everyone in your group has to have a role. So it could be something like note making in technology. So someone who looks after the breakout room, records the notes, someone who checks the time, make sure the group stays on tasks for productivity, or someone that looks after communication. So make sure that everyone in the group contributes and that they're the one that present back to the class. So just getting students to assign those roles and think about those roles is really, really key. And just our last thing before we finish up is just some preparation tips. So before we're sending students to those breakout rooms, sort of confirming the task and giving students a short amount of time to think about their ideas before they go to the breakout room. So you had a very short time just while we were trying to get the link for the whiteboard, but you had time to think about what you might want to, and Ellis said that to you, she pointed that out, like you've got some time, so think about what you might want to say or what you might want to put on your post-it note. So just giving them that single time to think before they have to go into a group environment. Again, Ellis has already said this, but utilising these different technologies like whiteboards, like collaborative docs, that people can participate without cameras if necessary. And one thing I've found, again, that's really useful is when we're bringing them back in and we're sort of cold calling on students, you know, giving them the question and again, giving them some time to think about what they want to say. So say like, these are the questions I'm going to ask, or this is the question I'm going to ask. Everyone have a minute to think about it. And then using something like the wheel of names is great for this because you're not actually choosing the student. So you're not picking on anybody. It's the wheel of names that's choosing for you. And the last one is, again, opening up that private chat to allow students to ask questions or answer as well, if you feel comfortable doing that. So those are just a few tips and things to think about. We've just come to the end of the session, so we will stay around. I know it's getting late, but if anyone does have any questions or would like to know anything else or would like to ask anything, we'll stay around for another few minutes. I'm just going to get a link to a little feedback form to pop into the chat. We'd appreciate any feedback on the session. But we will, of course, send out the slides, the recording, and all of the resources from the session as well afterwards, so you can access them. But thank you all so much for your participation. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions or anything else they want to ask, please do feel free before we head off for the night. Hopefully you're all going to do something nice now. Is anyone doing anything interesting with their evening?
I might get drive-through donuts.
Oh, that sounds really nice. Yeah. Where are you getting drive-through donuts from?
There's a Tim Hortons. I'm in Manchester, so we are lucky that we get a Tim Hortons.
That is very lucky. That sounds great. I think all I've done during this lockdown is eat. So yeah.
I feel the same.
I was just going to say, I think I've got biscuits that won't eat themselves. And then I thought, no, don't say that. So I was really glad when you said about donuts, Ellis. It made me feel a lot better.
Donuts/food are life.
Yes, exactly. What have we got to look forward? That's what we've got to look forward to, is eating nice things.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you, Anne. I'm glad that there was something interesting there for you. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone. If you don't have any other questions, then please, feel free to head off, and we'll finish the session there. Great. Thank you, Naomi.
Bye.
Thanks, Roslyn.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.